right up to the day you launched your business. Leanne, let me start with you because there were folks who said that the craft beer market was oversaturated when there were 5,000 breweries in the U.S. Now we're almost at 10,000.
Yeah.
I can't imagine you didn't talk to some people who said, do not start another craft brewery. But anyway, what was the best piece of advice you got before starting the company?
I had a great mentor who started a brewery in San Francisco probably for like 4 years before us. We really joined at the peak. Really didn't time that well. But two things. One's a little more practical piece of advice for like any entrepreneur thinking about making the leap. And he said, if you have a paying job, you should do this side hustle as long as possible while you're at that paying job to the point where they fire you because you're doing such a poor job at your paying job and you're obsessed with this new business. So that was really good advice. I mean, Tara and I were at our company until we had a beer in hand ready to hit the streets. In about 8 months, we were trying to keep it under wraps as we were developing the product. So that's the practical piece of advice. But two, he just had a lot of confidence in the fact that very few women are in the space. And yes, there were 10,000 breweries in the U.S. when we decided to join, but less than 2% were owned exclusively by women. So his confidence in us really was really helpful in giving us that nudge to take the leap.
And Ron, I don't know what kind of precedent there was for pet food via food truck before Woofbowl. So I imagine you probably heard some interesting advice before launching.
Absolutely. Our family still hates us to this day because we quit our jobs and did the dog food truck. No, there was no precedence. And I hate to say this not to make it racial, but this is like literally, I learned this in business school. This is the whitest industry in America. Mm-hmm. So there are very few people that, like, we don't even register. That's how few people of color are in the pet industry. And then on top of that, doing a dog food truck. But that was important to our differentiation because, this is about us. And so we knew we had to do something special, but we knew it had to be us. And so in terms of like advice, the best advice we got, and this is so indicative of how Sola and I work, the best advice we ever received was attention is not connection. Mm-hmm. Attention is not connection. And my friend here, who's a veteran, who now I love because I didn't know she was a Navy veteran. I'm a Navy veteran, so we're gonna be good friends. But really quick anecdote, if you'll allow me. Mm-hmm. So, I was in the Navy for about a year or two. Passed my physical exam, passed my written exam. I'm really excited. I'm advanced, so I come to muster quarters the next day. I got my, I'm ironed up. You could get a paper cut on my creases. I got the new patch on my arm, and so I come in. I'm at muster. I'm ready, and my chief comes in, and he comes over to me. He walks over to me slowly, and he punches me on my arm. And it wasn't too hard, wasn't too soft, but it was like, you feel me. And so he said, you want to be a good leader now? I gave him the face like, trying to play it cool. And I said, of course. And he said, if you want to be a good leader, remember one thing. He said, it's about your people. It's not about you anymore. He said, because they will write your resume, they will write your awards, and they will ultimately be the reason whether you're successful or not. And so Sola and I, that is the ethos and the logos of everything we do. It's why you rarely see our faces on social media. It's why we don't, put our resumes out, is because we want everything to be about the community, about the art, about the culture, and that's the best advice I ever received in my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gabby, how about you? You had already had a protein kind of bar business, so this wasn't totally uncharted territory for you, but what advice did you get about launching a cereal brand?
I think one of the greatest learnings that people gave in the form of advice after my prior business was really make sure there's product market fit before you launch. Which, of course, sounds like business 101, but I think there's also this idea amongst driven, ambitious entrepreneurs that if you're good enough, you can make any idea work. And you can push through perseverance, through just being really smart about how you connect the dots. And especially, in the kind of boom of startups of the past few decades, that idea sunk in for me in my last business. In my last business, we did not have product market fit. And we spent 6 years pushing a boulder up a hill. And eventually we had an okay outcome, not the outcome we were hoping for, but an okay outcome. And so the second time around, I wanted to really make sure we had product market fit. And we spent a fair amount of time validating it and making sure that when we launched, we felt that consumer pull rather than pushing. I think a lot of founders underestimate the difference in how successful a business can be and how quickly you can kind of skyrocket if you have that pull from the consumer versus an idea that's just okay, but you're trying to make work. So that was something I really internalized after the first business and made sure I carried through to the second business.
And what was it about, because people think, protein bars are all the rage right now. What didn't give you the product market fit that you were, in search of?
So the protein bar business I ran was called Exoprotein, and we were developing insect protein as a sustainable food source. So we were building a supply chain for sustainably grown and farmed and harvested crickets, which was, part of it was in the US, part of it I moved to Thailand for a while working with farmers there. So we were building a supply chain from scratch, which there were logical reasons why we were trying to introduce this into the food system in the US. Insect protein is far more sustainable, requires far less water, less feed per gram of protein. And so that was the idea. Protein bars were the vehicle that we were introducing that sustainable protein source to the consumer through. And so we partnered with a 3 Michelin star chef to create this line of protein bars with cricket protein in them. So it was a massive swing. I started that business in college. It turned out that getting the first couple million dollars of sales was easier than we thought. It really resonated in the CrossFit communities and the paleo communities, but crossing the chasm to the mainstream consumer was really, really hard. And we tried to push that for too long to make that mainstream. Ultimately, that was not going to be a $100 million business. It didn't have the product market fit for that scale. And so that was something we internalized for next time.
No, that's a really interesting point, and I just kind of want to piggyback that. We get asked, Solo and I get asked a lot from other founders. We get messages and emails all the time about product market fit, how do you start a business, how do you build a business, and something that we always regurgitate to them is when you're building a business, I think it's important, me personally, is you need to know what game you're playing. And I'm using the word game affectionately and respectfully. Are you building a $500 million business? Are you building a $50 million business, or are you building a $5 million business? When I was in business school, I had a business professor who used to say, Ryan, it's systems thinking. When you're in systems thinking, you don't sacrifice the design of a house for the room, you sacrifice the design of the room for a house. And so, I'm being funny, but, that's so true to your point. I'll just use us as a humble example. When we started, they said, oh, everyone's like franchise. And that's fine. I get it. But for us, we're really deep thinkers, and sometimes to a fault. And so I think for us, it was like, okay, let's think about that. What's at risk? What's at stake here? Do you think about supply chain risk management? Do you think about triple marginalization? Are you thinking about quality control? Are you thinking about customer service? Are you thinking about disintermediation? These are all things that you have to consider, to your point. And I think sometimes founders just go in and say, well, I don't know what I want, or I want 100. And I think understanding that structure follows strategy is what Gabby just mentioned, I think is important for founders or anyone going into business.
What you said about the scale you're looking to achieve, I think is so often missed.
100%.
And often I'll speak to early stage founders and they'll present this idea for a food company or a beverage company, and they'll ask if I think it's a good idea. And my first question is exactly what you said. It's like, well, is it a good idea? It depends. Are you trying to build this into a $100 million business? Are you trying to raise venture capital? Are you trying to have a lifestyle business?
Yeah.
And the answer is just entirely dependent on what you're trying to build. And if somebody has an idea for maybe a niche condiment,
Yep.
maybe it's an amazing idea for building a regional kind of natural food store size business that can support them, but it might be a terrible idea for building a $100 million business.
Great point, brother. Yeah.
Next, we'll hear about some challenges our founders faced early on in their